So we're trying to figure out, right? We're trying to figure out if this is the real space for you. So I have this one question. Do you know everything or have all the answers? Was it stressful?
Yes, but it was good. I mean, most people get into security work because you either are mission driven or you care about people and you want to see them safe and secure.
Now we're actually working really hard to close that gap and to kind of say that security is a part of, what keeps the lights of the business on. So it's like bringing that together. I find that that's the journey we're in now.
If you talk to anybody who knows everything, they're lying.
Agree. You've passed the test. So now you're qualified to be on the show and we can be friends.
Most people know that I am a lawyer by training. They immediately assume I'm not technical. It's the worst way to start a conversation. But starting out, that is really, really hard to walk into a room and have someone assume you're a junior associate or an intern or not knowledgeable. I mean, it just depends on what you want to do. There are a multitude of pathways into cybersecurity careers and into the federal government. The fun part about cybersecurity and emerging tech is that you will never know everything and that you're always learning.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this episode. So today I am so honored to be joined by Camille. So Camille is really truly a visionary. She's a leader. She is in the space of emerging technologies and cybersecurity. So Camille is also the CEO of CAS Strategies. She is at the forefront of advising businesses on cybersecurity, AI policy, and go-to-market strategies while really fostering innovation and trust in the technology ecosystem. So Camille has a background of the former National Cyber Director at the White House. She's had a background of a tech executive at Google, globally recognized policy expert, and really so much more. This is Cybersecurity Uncomplicated with Cyber Queen, where we break barriers one chat at a time. No one has the exact roadmap, but together we're challenging stereotypes. We'll show you that cybersecurity is for everyone. We're bold, smart, and unapologetically diverse. I'm so happy to be speaking with you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I am fangirling as well. I really appreciate you creating this platform and inviting me to share with you.
I was so excited. When I just had the thought about this podcast and speaking to people with unique journeys and perspectives in security, one of the first people I thought of was you. Because I've followed your journey and your career path, I think, for so long, from being, I think, first in the White House, if I can remember, and then going to Google and then going back. So it was and even I think it was Homeland Security as well, if I'm correct. Yeah. On LinkedIn specifically, I've followed so much of your knowledge sharing, your policy information, your guidance on policies when it comes to security. So I think that you've truly, if you don't know it, I think you probably do, but you've inspired a lot of people, including myself. So thank you for everything that you do and share. It's much appreciated.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm honored. I'm grateful to have stepped into spaces and rooms that have allowed me to do some really exciting and important work. And so I'm happy to share and represent as many of us as I can.
Amazing. So now I do have a little thing that I have to figure out here because this is, we have to make sure that you're qualified. You have to be qualified to be on the podcast, right?
Okay.
So we're trying to figure out, right? We're trying to figure out if this is the real space for you. So I have this one question. Do you know everything or have all the answers for a career in cybersecurity?
I wish. I mean, the fun part about cybersecurity and emerging tech is that you will never know everything and that you're always learning, and that the coming together of multiple perspectives and people with a wide swath of expertise is the real way to find a solution. And if you talk to anybody who knows everything, they're lying.
Agree. You've passed the test. So now you're qualified to be on the show and we can be friends. That was the next question, but I'm sure you would say yes. Yeah, let's do it. All right. So now your career has traversed law, technology, and cybersecurity. But I mean, how did you get there? How did you get into places like Google, and how did you find yourself in the White House?
Yeah, I mean, preparation. I don't think you can ever, I mean, I guess you could aspire to work in some of these places, but you can't chart out a clear path to working in any of these organizations. You prepare, you make sure you're smart on the issues, you put that out into the world. And when the opportunity arrives, because you are prepared, because you are thoughtful and knowledgeable, you can seize that opportunity and make the most of it. Most of the things that have come to me in my career are fortuitous. I couldn't have planned them, but when the opportunity showed up, I was able to demonstrate the reason I was the best person to be in that role or how I could add value. And I just did.
Amazing. And did you find specifically as a woman and maybe a black woman that it was challenging to kind of solidify yourself in those spaces?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even worse, because most people know that I am a lawyer by training, they immediately assume I'm not technical. So when you start off a conversation in cybersecurity and emerging technology, and folks assume at a baseline that one, you're younger because you're a woman and because, I present as younger, or that you're not technical or knowledgeable for some reason, it's the worst way to start a conversation, the worst way to start an engagement. I've come to kind of, at this point, not enjoy it, but have fun with the moments where people underestimate me. But starting out, that is really, really hard to walk into a room and have someone assume you're a junior associate or an intern or not knowledgeable, and just let my perspective speak for itself. I don't let that make me quiet in a room or shy away from identifying a challenge or a problem and weighing in on a conversation. And usually once I get to talking and ideating on solutions, people immediately realize that, oh, she might not be an engineer, which I would never claim to be, but she has some technical acumen. She knows what she's talking about. And her perspective, there's a reason she's in this room.
Yeah, amazing. And I love hearing that. And I can even resonate with so much of that because for me, I mean, I am an engineer, right? I am technical. I'm in
Yeah.
engineering and architecture. So, but still going into those rooms, it's almost like I first have to speak up in order to for anybody to start listen and actually seeing like, hey, she has some knowledge,
Yes.
she is technical. And some of it I now genuinely enjoy. I enjoy sitting and listening to all the perspectives, then formulating my views, and then giving that simply because sometimes people think you're not really going to speak up because how could you really be that technical? So I think it's double-edged here. It's like a somewhat an advantage if you learn how to capitalize on it. And then it's just about being confident enough in your knowledge and skills to break out of the mold that could put you into silence in these situations, right?
Yes, I completely agree. And I think there's a privilege in getting further in your career because it's a lot easier to do that. Early on, you feel like you have to speak up or you're intimidated by all the people in the room around you. And it's a little bit of a harder dynamic. But to your point, I think as you advance in your career, it becomes a little bit of a double-edged sword. And even the tips the balance in your favor, and walking into a room and having people underestimate you, and then you kind of knocking their socks off when you start to talk about whatever is going on, or having listened to what they said and weave together those perspectives in a way that they weren't expecting. To me, I get joy out of that piece.
Yeah, it is. It is like a cool superpower.
Yes.
So, as the Deputy National Cyber Director, right? What were some of your primary responsibilities in that role? And did you get to influence kind of national cybersecurity policy?
Yeah, I mean, I got to write it. During this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, an office called the Office of the National Cyber Director was created in the White House. It's the first time there was a new office since like the 1960s. And the National Cyber Director is the primary advisor for the president on cybersecurity issues and technology issues. And so The way that the original cyber director organized the office, Chris Inglis, was to have 4 deputies to kind of divide such a large portfolio. One focused on the federal government, one focused on strategy and budget, making sure that we could align the money to the things that we said were priorities. One focused on cyber operations and critical infrastructure and kind of that side of thing. And then I was focused on all future resilience. I got to take all the firefighting my colleagues did and ideate and illuminate ways that emerging technologies, our supply chain, cyber workforce, privacy, human rights in tech, how all of those issues could work in our favor to achieve our goal of a digital ecosystem that's resilient, defensible, equitable, and just aligned to our values and working in our favor that we all could benefit from. So it was a big portfolio, but I think the most fun because, firefighting gets old, but I got to take all of that and say, what should this look like and how do we get there? And so a lot of my work was focused on that future resilience piece or on people and thinking about what is the role of people in the midst of this ecosystem and environment that we're in.
Amazing. And did you feel like, because this sounds very much to me like this is a space that was obviously created now in the Biden-Harris administration after many, many decades and years. So, I mean, did you feel like you had to invent stuff, like invent these policies or come up with these new solutions? How did you go about it?
Yeah, I always find myself in places where I am creating something or building something, a new office, a new program. When I was at the Department of Homeland Security in the Obama administration, the office that I went to was a new office that I was helping to build. And, creating a new office at a company is one thing. Creating a new office or organization in government is really tough. Bureaucracy has shaped and formed itself in a way so that it can work and function, and people are leveraging a set of authorities that allow them to do things. And they tend to be rigid about relinquishing those things or changing the way they do things. And so, one of the hurdles in getting the office up and running and moving towards operating at maximum capacity and living up to the vision that was created for the office was just kind of moving through the bureaucracy and getting people, getting different organizations, getting different agencies to include us and to recognize what our goals were and what our role was in the interagency. And so a lot of the work was that, like creating a vision and a strategy for the office as a whole, but for my piece of that puzzle in general, and making sure that the entire federal apparatus knew that we were doing that work on their behalf so that they could focus on the operational, tactical work that is theirs to do and didn't have to think about this like national priority setting, strategy writing, policy writing as a whole. And so writing policy wasn't new because you do that as part of the government from a number of different vantage points, no matter what agency you're in. But this building a vision and a strategy for the nation, and not just domestically and not just the federal government, but the industries that we engage with, the state and local governments, nonprofits, all of that domestically, but also how we engage with our partners around the world. So how are we on the international stage? How are we collaborating in international bodies? How are we supporting our partners and learning from our partners in the work that we're doing?
Was it stressful?
Yes. Yes. But it was good. Most people get into security work because you either are mission driven or you care about people and you want to see them safe and secure. Like it tends to be people who are motivated by helping. And so while it was stressful, it was also fulfilling and impactful. Anything that I do professionally, I want it to feel like I am having impact. And I never felt that more than in this role. The opportunity to help set a national and international trajectory that then everyone would follow, to ideate and envision a more affirmative, like a good future and move in that direction, to focus on resilience rather than firefighting, was an awesome opportunity. And to bring together all of those subjects that I listed. It's rare that you get to have your hands in all the things that you're interested in, but I got to have my hands in all the things I was interested in once.
Amazing. And so I think If I remember, I mean, the Biden-Harris administration really introduced a couple of new cybersecurity initiatives. It was kind of these few, I would say, months or maybe years that in this administration that we really saw kind of initiatives coming forward in terms of, like, if I think the national cybersecurity strategy, there were some executive orders, the improving of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure controls, the AI security AI framework, right? There were so many. We haven't seen this in the past. So do you think that like, you know, the creation and kind of passing of those security policies really has had a good or massive impact on national security from that perspective?
Definitely. I mean, the investment in critical infrastructure, the shift from what we used to talk about before was public-private partnerships. Now it's public-private collaboration, like a true collaborative defense model where industry and government are coming together to ideate on solutions, to build policies, to mitigate risk. I think the evolution that happened leading up to the Biden-Harris administration, but accelerated in the Biden-Harris administration towards making the investments necessary for us to be a resilient nation, for more of our companies to be resilient, for more individuals to understand cybersecurity and their posture, to enable and unlock new technologies like AI, to get ahead of post-quantum encryption challenges. Like, all of those things were investments that needed to be made. Some, are very proactive. Some are like meeting the moment. But this administration really leaned in on the technology and cybersecurity issues in a way that will allow us to all reap the benefits, including the cyber workforce stuff. Getting more people in tech and cyber jobs, I think, is a huge, huge investment that will pay dividends for the economy and just for the lives of everyday Americans.
Yeah, agreed. And I think right around the world, it showed the elevation of, the importance of cybersecurity to critical infrastructure, like for digital assets, but more than that, right? For critical infrastructure, like of key assets that we need for living, like water systems and, our critical infrastructure beyond digital assets. Because I think before that was kind of a major oversight when it came to this. It was always security looks at digital assets and, information technology, information risk systems, not really true critical infrastructure for human life, basically.
Yeah. That cyber physical nexus is huge. And I think we often talked about it before this, but I think it really was illustrated for people in a way that they felt in this last 4 years, between JBS meats and people not being able to get their lunch meat, and Colonial Pipeline and people not being able to get gas. I think the very tangible demonstration of how a cyber incident can translate to something very physical pretty quickly really helped illuminate just how important investment in our infrastructure is, digital infrastructure or physical infrastructure.
Agreed. So let's shift gears a little bit here, because now there's been so much work done, right, in the last 4 years with the current administration. But now we shift gears to a new administration, potentially like a significant change in administration, right? So from your perspective, I mean, what does this shift mean for cybersecurity in the United States and really globally? Do you think there would be a continuation of the work, or reinventing the work, or changing this completely? What do you think?
So, cybersecurity traditionally is a nonpartisan or bipartisan issue. Everyone recognizes the importance of securing our digital infrastructure, our physical infrastructure, and that nexus we were talking about, that cyber physical nexus. Now, what might change is the prioritization. Do you invest your money here versus there? What's more likely to be attacked? That kind of thing. Traditionally, with a Trump administration, things are just a little bit more unpredictable. I think the Trump administration has already said they're going to roll back the AIEO, even though a lot of it builds off of the work of the 2020 EO out of the Trump administration. They did not have a cyber coordinator in the White House during the Trump administration. So how they use the Office of the National Cyber Director or a deputy national security advisor focused on cyber and emerging tech is going to be really interesting to watch, and how they make those investments. The desire to roll back the scale and scope of government agencies like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, is going to be really impactful to the cybersecurity landscape. So, I mean, there's actually the potential for a lot of change, despite cybersecurity traditionally being a pretty nonpartisan or bipartisan issue, because of some of the other factors, the desire to put their own stamp on the issue, the desire to roll back funding, the critique of CISA as an agency as a whole and some of the scope of their mission. They'd like to make that smaller. And then, I think some of the other issues will impact the cyber and tech, emerging tech in particular, landscape and trajectory. For example, while both administrations, both parties are focused on China and competitiveness with China, a Trump administration is going to be dig in a lot more on that. And so what might that mean for things like export controls and engaging in standards bodies, and how artificial intelligence is invested in? They also don't want to over-regulate artificial intelligence. So there might be a rolling back of some of the regulations. There might be an underinvesting in ethics and bias and, some of the other pieces of the safety, trustworthy AI puzzle that aren't like hard cybersecurity issues. So I think we stand to see a lot of changes. That also will manifest itself on the international stage, because how the US shows up on some of these issues. In the past, we initiated the AI resolution on trustworthy AI at the UN and other things that encapsulated some of these topics like bias and security, et cetera. They're not likely to include all of those topics, which then changes the way issues are framed in the UN and in other global multinational bodies. And so it leaves room for other nations to take a leadership role on some of those topics and some of those issues, and I think they will. It also will put some countries in a position where they feel even more so like they have to make a choice between regimes. And I think it'll be a very interesting 4 years. And I feel like cybersecurity and emerging technologies is the least of that interesting, but it still will cause a lot of churn and changes in our space as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think given maybe the geopolitical landscape, right, and the tensions that we're seeing, I think cybersecurity could become a lot more important. I think it was already important like in the last 4 years, but I think it's going to become even more important as we go forward now. And if we I think there's an EO that was brought in around international cybersecurity that speaks to how to address aspects like Russia and China on the cybersecurity side of things. And when we think about that, I think it's so important how like governments would address the cybersecurity concerns going forward with the geopolitical landscape, like as unpredictable and volatile as it is. So, I mean, is it when you are there doing the work, does that have much impact on kind of the decisions that you're making and the directions that you're going into?
Yes, Trump's perspective on like a Russia and a China is going to set the stage quite a bit. When I was in government, our positioning on nation state actors and how we interact on a global scale sets the trajectory for a number of different things. So this will definitely influence how cybersecurity and emerging tech policy moves. And so someone in my position who is now consulting with large companies, small companies, nonprofits on the outside, my job will be to understand the changes and like how they will change operation and how those things trickle down to impact the way organizations can move. And so there are a lot of people within companies, within academic institutions, within nonprofits who are pretty concerned about grant funding from the government. They're concerned about like projects and initiatives that they've invested in that are, wondering how things will change their operations very tactically, and how even a switch in geopolitical perspective, right? If we stop supporting Ukraine, all of those things are going to change so much about how we operate as a society and how we relate to our partners and our adversaries in such a way that it's going to change a lot of things. So from my seat right now, I definitely am keeping a close eye on how things are changing so that I can help organizations meet the moment on the changing geopolitical landscape and how it impacts them both now, and whether it's their aspirations for moving globally, or if they are global companies that have to think about how this push and pull changes their ability to serve their clients both here in the US or abroad.
I just wonder how different is it for you now, or what's the feeling like? Because I mean, you've been in kind of the federal government, Homeland, and then Google, and then now consulting with these businesses, right? So, do you think that there's enough work being done to equip smaller businesses on how to deal with cybersecurity and cyber threats, maybe just from the government side? Or do you think that that should be the case?
So, the Small Business Administration has been doing a lot of work to support small businesses. CISA provides a number of resources for businesses of all sizes. The hard part about supporting small and medium businesses is it becomes a risk decision and a financial decision, how much they invest in cybersecurity. I think more companies are recognizing just how much business email compromise, ransomware attacks are on the rise and are prevalent, and that they could be a target. So people are starting to make investments. But if you're a small business owner who only has a small amount of money, you think that the priorities for your organization are to invest in these ways to make sure that you can deliver your services or make payroll or create a product, you might not invest in cybersecurity in the ways that you can and should. And so that will forever be the tension there on small to medium businesses. We could definitely do more. There are always new opportunities to translate the direct impact to an organization and the impact to the bottom line. I think we don't have the conversation in the right ways all the time. I think there's a narrative problem in cybersecurity by and large. I think when we started out, we were just scaring the crap out of people. And so what happened was this cognitive dissonance where people are like, I'm not a security expert. I don't know. I'm overwhelmed. And either they're not looking for me, or even if they are looking for me, there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm just not going to worry about it. And that's a real problem because, quite frankly, you and I both know this, 80% of the issues are cured by really small behavior changes. And, two-factor authentication, updating your software, the things that people keep hearing over and over again could make such a world of difference. And for a small business, implementing those things and making sure whoever your team is leveraging those things, and that you hold your vendors accountable, do a little extra searching to find vendors who prioritize security, is an investment worth making for your bottom line. And I think translating that narrative, making that clearer for people would go a long way.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, unfortunately, I have this wish when it comes to newly built things, newly created small businesses. I have this wish that it's just part of the build, right? That's, yeah. I think what I'm striving towards is that it's just part of the build. It's just inherent, like you lock your doors, that's just what you do. So security is just what it is. But I definitely agree with you. I mean, I know when I started in security, it was security with the no people. And there was a reason why it was no, because everything people did was so scary, and we would freak them out by, saying all these things and scaring the life out of people. So it's this dissonance between security professionals and the business. And, now we're actually working really hard to close that gap and to kind of say that security is a part of, what keeps the lights of the business on. So it's bringing that together. I find that that's the journey we're in now.
Yes, Completely agree. I think if we could make investments in that regard, it would be important. And a big piece of that to me is the education component. So one of the things I worked on at the White House was writing the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy. And everybody loves to talk about the technical components and changing the technology and technical risk mitigations and changing the policy, but we often neglect the people. And there needs to be a shift in our education system. Just like we are taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, there are some base level cyber skills that everyone needs to know. And I don't need everybody to be a cybersecurity expert, but not just digital literacy either, turning it on and off, but computational literacy, understanding the choices that you're making, digital resilience, being able to adapt to changing technological environment, and just being aware of cyber careers. I think, one, it would go a long way towards advancing what you're talking about, that secure by design mentality, so that no matter what you build, security is like a baseline feature. Just like you have to figure out your finances, you got to figure out the security. But also it opens up more people who want to get in security careers and can benefit from the economic opportunity there and help expand the security footprint, all those good things. So I think there's some societal investments that need to happen in our education system that would advance us. And that's a global thing. We're all contending with it, but it's a really important investment that too many of us are not focused on because it's not as sexy as the tech changes or the policy changes.
Yeah. For those who are aspiring to get into cybersecurity and maybe to explore some of the roles that you've been in, like in the government or the federal government, what do you think is a core fundamental educational background or skill set that they need to have to be able to succeed in this path?
I mean, it just depends on what you want to do. There are a multitude of pathways into cybersecurity careers and into the federal government. I mean, you could be a marketer and decide to do security marketing. You could be a lawyer and decide to do security, or you could be an engineer and do security work. I would say maintain your curiosity and be able to adapt and learn the technology so that you are able to move and operate in that space. Be a good communicator, understand what the requirements are to make that transition. So the federal government is moving towards looking at skills more than they are looking at degrees or certifications, things like that. Those are proxies for demonstrating and communicating skills and knowledge that you have, but they're not the only ways. And so if you're interested in working in the federal government, but really in the cybersecurity space at all, NIST has a NICE website, and I can't remember what NICE stands for, National something Cyber Education. And they have all of these like mappings. What are the skill sets required to do a bunch of different jobs in the cyber domain? And use that to kind of think about what you want to do, but also communicate the skills you have. Make sure you have those skills and then communicate the skills you have, and that should help you. And then the federal government's also getting a lot more creative with how they get people into government jobs. So if you look at tech2gov.com, there are a number of jobs and opportunities and these career fairs that are both virtual and in person and create really fun pipelines into the federal government that are not just using USA jobs, which is the path of the past, and allows for you to talk to people and learn and, of course, apply to jobs in the federal government. So I encourage people to look into it if they have any interest in working in the federal space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so fascinating that you've said that, the federal government is looking to move towards people who are actually skilled to do the work rather than looking at maybe certifications or kind of longer term education, because I think for a lot of people that has been kind of this gatekeeping scenario in security, right? Is that a lot of people gatekeep this space by saying you have to have certain levels of education and this and this and this in order to even, be considered for the job. Where in my opinion, as a practitioner in the industry, for me, it's really important that someone is skilled enough to do the work, regardless if they've done the 4-year degree or not. So it's super interesting that you say that there is that pivot. Do you think that that's a pivot that we're seeing globally now as well from an employment perspective?
I hope so. That's what we were trying to push towards. I mean, look, so many of the best cybersecurity practitioners are self-taught. So to say that the only way that you could become a cybersecurity practitioner is to have a 4-year degree or to have a CISSP is ridiculous. Now, there might be roles where you need some of those things or where you need even a higher degree, like a PhD, to do the job. But those are actually less prevalent than ones that you could learn at a boot camp or a training course. What has happened is that it's so much easier to model a job description off of somebody who did the job in the past, right? You had somebody who had a 4-year degree, they were a computer science major, and they did a good job. So I'm going to write a job description that basically describes this person who did the job well, rather than focusing on the skills. Or you inherit something like that, where it's like, oh, this has always been the job description, so I'm going to do that. It's easier to actually interrogate what skills you need versus what things they'll learn on the job, or what proxies for that demonstration are necessary versus helpful, takes work. And a lot of people don't have the bandwidth for that. So I am hoping that more organizations recognize that difference and say, well, really what I'm looking for is somebody who can code, somebody who can write, somebody who can blah, blah, blah. And we'll put that on paper. And yes, demonstrating that you can write might be a 4-year degree, but it also might be an essay you submit as part of your job submission. And so I hope that more organizations will think critically about what they actually need, because it's going to be the best way for them to get the best talent.
Yeah, agreed. And it will make, we will make such headway in the industry when it comes to that, because we'll be able to employ a lot more of the right people to do the work, and we'll take a lot of kind of the pressure off on professionals that's currently in the industry, simply because there's not people found for kind of what I would say inaccurate job descriptions, you know? Yeah, I think
and what you're seeing is, to your point, I mean, what you're seeing is, if you say it's an entry-level job, but you need a CISSP, which is 5 years of experience to get a CISSP, that's why we're all stressed, because we can't get no entry-level people that we can help train and who can help with the load, because they need 5 years of experience, but that's not entry-level. So also, we're causing ourselves a lot of unnecessary stress and strain.
Yeah, agree. So you co-founded initiatives like Share the Mic in Cyber, and I think it's Next Generation National Security, I think, to, of course, promote diversity, right? So what's your take on how far we've come so far in cybersecurity when it comes to diversity and more different people being brought into the industry, and, firstly being aware of the possibility and option to have this as a career. And secondly, just being able to enter the field and truly be supported and succeed.
Yeah, in the wake of the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, we started Share the Mic in Cyber because people wanted to help Black practitioners in the space, but didn't know how. And this was an opportunity for them to give voice and a platform and to catalyze a conversation, a really frank conversation about the systemic inequities in the space and how people that looked different were experiencing the industry very differently from people in the majority. And I think that realization and the conversation that was catalyzed and that awareness building really helped advance the space in terms of diversity. We still have a long way to go. There's still more to do. This is a very male-dominated space. It's a very white space. But I think we've made a lot of progress. And what tends to happen is people who work in tech spaces want like an openness and a freedom and a flexibility. I think that's why you see so many tech companies that are like, come as you are, it's fine, whatever. And so I think that breeds an awareness and an openness to the individuality of people. Now, there are some systemic and structural things that prevent that. There are things that people don't even think about, like the job stuff we were talking about, job descriptions. Those are limiting people without people even trying. And so I think there's an advancement that is happening, but there's a lot more work to be done. And one of the reasons that I think that this work has made progress is because we've been doing a better job of having a conversation about why it matters for the work as well, right? Like, diversifying the industry isn't just a nice thing to do or the right thing to do. It is those things too. But quite frankly, if we are working on cybersecurity issues, which cybersecurity is the culmination of people, technology, processes, or policies against the backdrop of an adversary. That means 2 out of those 4 factors are people. The adversary and the people part are people, right? So like, how do we not take the time to understand how people think and how they live, and how a technology that is implemented in one societal context over another, or one culture over another, might not change its use and therefore change the threat landscape and therefore change the risk mitigations you need to have. And if you think about it like that, the best proxy for having awareness of how those changes might manifest themselves and having a line of sight that the world is broader than the intended uses of the technology that you created, that is by having a diverse staff and pulling diverse people into how you test your products or how you get feedback. Those are ways that you can actually understand the threat landscape and then therefore be better at cybersecurity, because you've covered all the risk mitigations or are better able to communicate where there are still gaps. And I think when people think about it from that perspective, they start to internalize it a little differently and recognize just how important it is to the work. Like, diversity is a national security imperative. It is an imperative to be a good cybersecurity practitioner.
Yeah, agree. And you've explained it so well. And I have a personal story on this, not only from being, a female in so many all male rooms in South Africa alone, but then moving to Europe and being kind of the only South African person, firstly in the room, and then the only female, the only non-white female, like so many things. But the true value here is that with me being here, I started bringing a completely different and unique perspective. And with that perspective, we were able to implement changes in the way we strategically look at threats and adversaries, because we can now, weigh up different contexts, different mindsets, bring together kind of different perspectives of how someone sees this. And it makes you bring in place kind of this multilateral solutioning to a security problem, as opposed to just kind of a single dimension view. And so the more diversity you have, the more uniquely people can think and bring those perspectives, and you can bring a stronger, response to cyber threats. I think that's so important. And I think diversity is often misconstrued as the fact that we don't want the males, or we don't want the white male in the team or in the space. But that's not it. It's just that we need to move beyond that, right? So there's no threat to what's existing. It's like we need way more than what's existing. And so we need to bring in the diversity to what's already there.
Yes, I think that's an important caveat too. I mean, in an industry where we've got hundreds of thousands of open cyber jobs, just in the US alone, approaching 1 million, if not exceeding 1 million globally. How could we ever say this is about excluding anyone, even white males, to your point? It is about just adding more voices, more perspectives, more hands to attack this very challenging landscape. And so, I think that's a really important thing to note, is that it is not about excluding anyone or removing people from the space. It's just about adding.
Yeah, agree. What's one bit of advice that you would give to organizations that's really trying to strategically foster a more inclusive cybersecurity workforce? Like, what would you say? What's your first point of guidance on how they can go about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say first, remember that it is a strategic business imperative. And I would make sure that your policies, your job descriptions, your retention policies all allow for the differences that will show up in your workforce if you are recruiting people outside of whatever your typical person is. Also, you cannot go back to the same watering holes and find new people. You have to expand where you advertise jobs, what networks you link to, what organizations or universities or community groups you go and talk to talk about the fact that you guys are looking for jobs. Like, you need to make some investments. Aspen Digital has a really good guide on how to build out your interview process to remove some of the bias so that you could be more open. Things like, it's okay to have a referral system, but let that happen at the end. You have no idea that there's a referral until the very end. So maybe it could be the tipping point between one or two or three candidates, but it should not exclude people from the beginning or limit you to only people who've got that referral. And so some small tweaks in process could really help you open the aperture for who comes to your organization and then how you keep them.
Ooh, that is so fascinating, because the cybersecurity industry, I would say, is this community of people and that thrive on referrals, right? So that is super, super interesting, because I definitely know people are more inclined to start with referrals than to give, new applicants the first opportunity.
Yeah. And I think just that small switch still makes the referral a powerful thing, a helpful thing. But like, evaluate people based on those skills that we talked about. Evaluate them based on how they show up. And then when you've got two strong candidates and you need to decide between the two, use it for that. Use it as a tiebreaker. Don't use it to make your decision in totality, because then no one new ever gets into the space.
I agree. Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's definitely my takeaway here, because it's definitely the opposite right now. You are genuinely, you're a leader, you're a visionary in the cybersecurity space. What is your vision for the future of the field, and or what are some of the emerging challenges that you think that we should prepare for?
I mean, quite frankly, I think this change in administration is going to create a vacuum in the investment and diverse talent that we were just talking about, all the same reasons. And so I hope that the industry continues to make progress, recognizing just how much of an imperative it is to the work to bring more people into the space. So that's the first thing, because the investments in education and in training new talent and in upskilling and right skilling people, that is a foundational requirement for us to meet the moment on any ransomware threat or any agentic, malware that's like polymorphic and changing, its scope every 5 minutes or as it moves into a new network. Those are all things that are on the horizon and we should be preparing for and we should continue to think about. But like, if we don't make it an investment in people to be able to do that work, we will not be able to do that. And then, of course, it's some of the things that I was talking about, thinking about how AI changes cyber attacks and therefore needs to change cyber defense, thinking about how we continue to make progress on the ransomware threat, how we continue to build resilient supply chains and make investments in transparency so people actually understand what's in both their software and hardware supply chains. And then just this, really understanding how to leverage all of the potential risk mitigations at your disposal. Like a study just came out about how like phishing training as it stands right now is not working. And of course not. When you are like just watching a video at work, it's not going to really help you do much. But how do we build tools that are secure by design and are thinking about the ways in which people try to trick another person, as well as how do we create buffers and other mitigations that allowed us to mitigate the scope of impact if somebody does happen to click that link. And so I'm charging people to be creative. I'm charging people to not be limited by the priorities of the administration if they do not continue to focus on education and training and making sure that that focus is diverse. And just, much of the work will continue in the same ways, but those things worry me.
And as I'm following, your points here of what you're mentioning, a lot of it leans towards the fact that these are still the basics, right? Because a lot of organizations are focusing on implementing all these maybe big bells and whistles when it comes to cybersecurity tooling and trying to prevent certain things. And those are all required. That's fine. But a lot of the basics are still missing when it comes to basic security hygiene, the user still being the weakest link and still being tricked here because the adversaries are preying more and more on the human weakness. And so there needs to be a cultural shift in order to really start to address the human side as well as the by design, to try and mitigate a lot of the first points of entry and, like the low hanging fruits of what we face in the industry.
Yeah. I mean, I hate the framing that humans are the weakest link because we are the cybersecurity professionals. It is our job to figure out how to support people, right? And so to your point, I think that means there has to be a culture shift where we are thinking differently about how we build security programs, how we build products, and how we build services that allow for the humanity and people that actually contemplate how people will use something, how it might show up in their lives, and how they'll engage with it. That's the way that our security mitigations actually meet the moment on how somebody will use it and be able to protect them. And so that's really the charge, to flesh it out. It is to rethink our security apparatus such that we are actually thinking about all of those factors, the technology, the people, the process, and that adversary in a way upfront, secure by design, but that allows us to anticipate we won't ever get all of them, but many of the ways people are manipulated and that tools are weaponized and allow us to create pathways and mitigations that protect people. That's our jobs. Humans are not the weakest links. They're not security experts. That's not for them to do. Even if we want them to be more thoughtful about engaging with technology and update software and do those small things, as the practitioners, how do we create an environment that allows them to show up and meet them where they are?
So create that space where you move from kind of that, because it is an industry thought process, right? This is what we are taught with all of the security awareness training and everything is like, human is the weakest link, but rather build the technology and the environments and the processes and the systems to elevate the human in this process so that it becomes easier for the humans to be able to not fall victim to these things, but to be able to support and sustain their own digital assets, which obviously with the support of cybersecurity professionals, but create the environment. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yes, and it's a much more fun way to think about our industry. That's why I'm in it, to think about the complexity of like, how do I leverage technical mitigations and policy and think about how this tool is showing up in the lives of people is a much more fun day-to-day career to figure out how you solve those challenges than the big checklist of things and tools that you are supposed to implement in your organization. And you've not given a lot of thought to whether it actually meets the mail on what you're trying to accomplish. So, I also think it's just more fun to build a program that way.
Absolutely. And it's fun because you get security professionals more interested in the human psychology here, which also then in turn helps against adversaries, right? Because it is, there are humans on the other side. There's also technology and there's also things, but there's humans that's trying to target, other humans in actual fact. So that's brilliant. So, what message or advice would you leave or would you want to leave with our audience, especially those that are interested in really truly making an impact in cybersecurity?
Bring your whole self to this work. They heard stories from you and from me about how important it is that our lived experiences and our perspective color how we see technology showing up in our lives and in the lives of the people around us, and therefore translating into risk mitigation. And so I would say, if you are the person in the room that has a different opinion or saw something a different way that is actually a value add, don't feel like you should keep that to yourself. And there's so much room and space in this industry for you to make an impact, for you to help people. So please bring your whole self to this work.
Amazing. Camille, and then maybe one final question here for you as we wrap up. What's next for you? I mean, you've now got your own consulting firm where you're doing amazing things. So what's next for you?
Right now, I mean, other than working with some of my clients, I'm in the process of focusing more on a global scale in terms of policy and governance. So about a month ago, I convened about 40 world leaders focused on global majority countries and AI governance. And so now I've been partnering with the French to make sure that informs the French AI Summit. One of the things I'm really passionate about is making sure that global majority countries are meaningfully helping to set the global governance agenda and the global governance frameworks. And so how do we get them engaged and showing up into these fora, but also like prepared and attuned to the conversations that are being happening and change the conversations to meet them. So we had a really robust discussion. I have a report that is coming out based on that discussion, and I'll be working to make sure that global majority countries are well represented in the French AI Summit. And then also doing something similar for small businesses. For me, it's really important that the voices that aren't as heard in these discussions get elevated, because that's the way, to our earlier point, that we better understand the threat landscape and can be more proactive in mitigating risk. And so a lot of my work is focused on that.
Your journey is absolutely fascinating. I really want to say thank you so much for joining me, for speaking with me, and for sharing so many incredible insights. I personally have so many takeaways here, and I'm sure everyone that's gonna listen and watch will be truly inspired. You're genuinely like a leader that's really committed to the change and transformation in the cybersecurity industry and representing people, right? Representing communities and people, and even like you're saying, smaller and larger countries. Everyone should have a voice, and this should be a shared community and a shared space where we all work to make a difference. So this has been such a fun conversation. I really want to thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for creating this space. It was such a pleasure.
This is Cybersecurity Uncomplicated, and I'm your host, Cyber Queen.